Jorge stood on the balcony of his opulent mansion, the soft hues of the sunset spilling across the horizon. He leaned against the ornate railing, gazing out at the sprawling gardens below, meticulously manicured yet void of life. The vibrant colors painted the sky, but they did little to fill the emptiness that had settled deep within him. Despite his wealth, an unshakable loneliness gnawed at him. He had everything: money, power, and luxury, but none of it seemed to matter anymore. The laughter of friends, the clinking of glasses during lavish parties, all felt distant and hollow. As the sun dipped lower, Jorge's thoughts wandered to the countless charitable initiatives he had funded, the lives he had touched through his generosity. Yet, with each passing day, he questioned whether his efforts made any real difference. "Is this truly what life is about?" he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible above the whispering breeze. He sighed, wishing for a sense of purpose that had long eluded him. Meanwhile, in a shadowy alley far removed from the splendor of his home, Maria clutched her son, Pedro, tightly against her chest. The chill of the night air seeped into her bones, and her heart felt heavy with despair. She scanned the surroundings, her eyes darting between the crumbling brick walls that seemed to close in on them. "There has to be somewhere safe, somewhere warm," she whispered, more to herself than to Pedro, who was nestled against her side, his small fingers intertwined with hers. "Mama, I'm scared," he replied, his voice shaky. Maria looked down at her son, his innocent blue eyes brimming with fear, and her heart ached. She wished desperately for a better life, a life filled with safety and warmth, where they wouldn't have to worry about where they would sleep next. "Sure, mi amor," she soothed, brushing a stray hair from his forehead. "We will find a place. I promise." But deep down, she felt the weight of her promises threatening to suffocate her. The streets had been unforgiving, and every day felt like a battle against despair. Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed through the alley. Jorge, lost in his contemplations, had decided to take a stroll through the quieter parts of town. He had always believed that seeing the world beyond his mansion was essential to understanding the lives of those less fortunate. As he turned a corner, the sight of Maria and Pedro huddled together in the darkness struck him like a lightning bolt. His heart raced as he approached them, the stark contrast between their ragged clothes and his tailored suit evident. "Excuse me," he said, his voice warm yet filled with concern. "Are you two all right?" Maria looked up, startled, her eyes wide with suspicion. "We're fine," she replied defensively, instinctively pulling Pedro closer. Jorge took a step back, sensing her apprehension. "Please, I mean no harm. I can see you're in need. Would you like to come to my home? I can offer you food and shelter for the night." Maria hesitated, her instinct screaming to protect her son. "Why would you do that?" she asked, skepticism lacing her tone. Jorge smiled gently, his eyes softening. "Because I can. It's the least I can do." Pedro tugged at his mother's sleeve, his voice barely a whisper. "Mama, please. I'm hungry." Her heart wavered at the desperation in his plea. "Just for one night," she murmured, uncertainty lacing her words. "Just for one night," Jorge echoed, hoping his sincerity would break through her walls. After a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Maria nodded slowly. "All right, we'll come with you." As they walked together through the dimly lit streets, an unspoken bond began to form. Jorge glanced at Maria, noting the weariness etched on her face, and at Pedro, who clung to his mother's hand as if it were a lifeline. Little did they know, this chance encounter would set into motion a chain of events that would intertwine their lives in ways they could never have imagined. As Maria and Pedro stepped into the opulent room that would be their new sanctuary, they were momentarily speechless. The walls were adorned with exquisite paintings, and the plush carpet felt like a cloud beneath their feet. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting a warm glow on the elegant furniture. Maria's heart raced with a mix of disbelief and cautious hope. She turned to Pedro, who was wide-eyed, taking in the lavish surroundings. "Can you believe this, Mama?" he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. "It's like a palace." Maria smiled, a soft, bittersweet smile. "Yes, my love, it is. But remember, we must be careful. This is all new to us. She knelt beside him, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. We must make sure we don't forget where we came from. Pedro nodded, though his gaze was still fixed on the shimmering chandelier above. Do you think we can stay here forever? We'll take it one day at a time, Maria replied, her voice steady but laced with uncertainty. As they unpacked their meager belongings, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that their luck might finally be changing. Meanwhile, in another part of the mansion, Jorge watched them from a distance, a small smile playing on his lips. He felt a rare sense of warmth as he observed the bond between mother and son. It was a sight he had longed to see in his own life, one that reminded him of the family dinners he had grown distant from. He walked to the expansive kitchen, where a gourmet meal simmered, and took a moment to compose himself. "Dinner will be ready soon," he called out, hoping to break the ice. "I made your favorite, chicken with herbs and roasted vegetables." Maria's face lit up with appreciation as she and Pedro made their way to the dining room. "Thank you, Jorge. You didn't have to go through all this trouble for us." "Consider it a welcome gift," he replied, waving his hand dismissively. "I want to make you feel at home." They took their seats at the grand table, and Jorge poured them glasses of sparkling water, the bubbles rising like their hopes for a better future. As they began to eat, Maria and Pedro exchanged glances, silently communicating their astonishment at the meal before them. The flavors were unlike anything they had ever tasted. "This is amazing," Pedro exclaimed, his eyes sparkling. "Can we have this every day?" "Only if you promise to help me cook," Jorge chuckled, his laughter echoing against the high ceilings. "You'll be my sous chef." "I can do that," Pedro beamed, his enthusiasm infectious. Maria watched her son with a mix of pride and sorrow, knowing this was a fleeting moment of joy that contrasted sharply with their recent struggles. After dinner, Jorge invited them to sit in the cozy living room, where a fire crackled in the fireplace. They shared stories, the atmosphere lightening as Maria talked about her life before the streets, carefully avoiding the darker details. Pedro animatedly recounted his favorite cartoons, and Jorge found himself laughing at the boys' antics. As the evening wore on, Maria drifted into her thoughts while organizing their few belongings. Among them, she found an old, ornate locket she had tucked away, its intricate design catching her eye. The locket was a remnant of a lifelong past, a token of memories she had buried deep in her heart. Jorge, noticing her distraction, leaned forward. "What's that?" he asked, curiosity piqued by the glint of the locket. "Just something from my past," Maria replied, her voice barely above a whisper as she clutched it tightly. "May I see it?" he asked gently, sensing the weight of her emotions. Maria hesitated, her fingers tightening around the locket. "It's not important," she said, forcing a smile. "Just a piece of jewelry." Jorge studied her for a moment, sensing the hidden depths of her reply. "You know, it's okay to share your past. We all have one, and it shapes who we are." Maria met his gaze, and for a brief moment, she considered revealing everything. The heartbreak, the loss, and the dreams that had slipped through her fingers. But the fear of judgment kept her silent, and she simply nodded, hoping he would drop the subject. As they settled in for the night, Jorge retired to his room with thoughts swirling in his mind. He didn't understand the connection he felt to Maria and Pedro, but something about their presence stirred a longing within him. One for genuine connection, for understanding, and perhaps for redemption. In the quiet of the mansion, he contemplated the uncharted territory of their newfound relationship, oblivious to the secrets that lingered in the shadows, waiting to be unveiled. Jorge sat in the expansive dining room, the polished mahogany table gleaming under the soft glow of the chandelier. The air was rich with the scent of roasted chicken and herbs, a stark contrast to the stale odor of the alley where he had first encountered Maria and Pedro. He absently toyed with the ornate locket he'd found among Maria's belongings, feeling a strange connection to it, as if it held secrets waiting to be uncovered. Maria entered the room, her demeanor slightly tense as she caught sight of Jorge's contemplative expression. "Dinner smells wonderful," she said, forcing a smile as she approached the table, Pedro trailing behind her, clutching a sketchbook. Thank you, Maria, Jorge replied, setting the locket down with a soft thud. I wanted to talk to you about something. His heart raced slightly, unsure of how she would react. Maria's smile faded, and she hesitated, her eyes darting to the locket. Is it about the locket? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, he said, his tone gentle but firm. I found it in your things, and I can't help but feel there's a story behind it. Would you share it with me? Maria's gaze fell to the floor as she gathered her thoughts. It's just a locket, she said, her voice trembling. It belonged to my mother. I've kept it for as long as I can remember. Jorge leaned in closer, intrigued. What's inside? She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. A picture of my parents on their wedding day. They were happy then, before everything changed. She paused, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. After I left home, I couldn't bear to part with it. It's all I have left of them. Why did you leave? Jorge asked softly, wanting to understand. Taking a deep breath, Maria glanced at Pedro, who was quietly sketching a landscape on the floor. I fell in love with someone my family disapproved of. They thought he was beneath me, and they were right, in a way. When I chose him over them, they disowned me. I had nowhere to go. Jorge felt a pang of compassion. I'm so sorry, Maria. I can't imagine what you went through. He paused, then added, You're safe here now. You and Pedro can stay as long as you need. Maria looked up, her expression a mix of gratitude and sorrow. It's just, I don't want to burden you. You have done so much already. Burden? No, Jorge replied, shaking his head. You're not a burden. You're giving me a chance to help, and that's important to me. As they spoke, Pedro glanced up from his drawing, curiosity shining in his young eyes. Can I show you my drawings, Mr. Jorge? He asked, his voice brightening the somber atmosphere. Of course, Pedro. I'd love to see them, Jorge encouraged, eager to shift the focus from the heavy conversation. Pedro eagerly scrambled to his feet, presenting his sketchbook to Jorge. This is my favorite one, he said, flipping to a page depicting a vibrant sunset over a cityscape, reminiscent of the one Jorge admired from his balcony. I drew it from your window. Jorge examined the drawing, impressed by the boy's talent. This is incredible, Pedro. You have a real gift. Have you ever thought about showing your art to others? Pedro's eyes widened in surprise. You think it's good enough? Absolutely, Jorge replied, his voice warm with encouragement. You could even have an exhibition someday. Maria, watching the interaction, felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. It was the first time in a long while that she had seen her son's smile reach his eyes, a stark reminder of the joy lost during their struggles. As they settled down to eat, the atmosphere shifted. Stories began to flow, with Maria sharing small anecdotes about her life before everything fell apart, and Jorge recounting humorous tales from his childhood. They laughed together, each laugh a stitch in the fabric of a new connection, weaving slowly but surely into something stronger. Yet, beneath the laughter, Maria felt the weight of her secrets pressing down on her. She was grateful for Jorge's kindness, but the locket remained a constant reminder of the past she had fought so hard to leave behind. As the evening wore on, she silently vowed to protect her son from the shadows of her past, even as a part of her yearned to share the truth with the man who had shown them so much compassion. Jorge stood on the balcony of his sprawling mansion, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the meticulously manicured gardens below. The opulence of his surroundings felt hollow, a gilded cage that no longer brought him joy. He turned away from the view, contemplating the recent changes in his life. Since Maria and Pedro had arrived, a flicker of hope had ignited within him, breathing life into the emptiness he had endured for so long. Mr. Jorge? Maria's voice called from the hallway, pulling him from his thoughts. He turned to see her standing at the entrance, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, framed by the soft light seeping through the grand doorway. She appeared both nervous and hopeful, clutching a small notebook against her chest. Yes, Maria, he replied, stepping forward. Is everything all right? I just wanted to thank you again for everything, she said, her voice trembling slightly. It's been a long time since Pedro and I felt safe. Jorge smiled, the warmth of her gratitude melting away the remnants of his solitude. You don't have to thank me. I believe in second chances. Besides, I have something for you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. I'd like to offer you a position at my company. I think it would be a good start for both of us. Maria's eyes widened, disbelief washing over her features. A job? But I don't have any experience in business. You have a life experience that many lack, Jorge replied, his tone earnest. You've shown resilience, and I believe that you can adapt and learn quickly. It could give you a chance to regain your independence, and it would be an honor to have you on my team. Mr. Jorge, I don't know what to say, she stammered, her voice thick with emotion. Just say you'll think about it, he said gently. No pressure. I want you to feel comfortable with this decision. Okay, I will think about it, she agreed, a faint smile breaking through her apprehension. Thank you. As Maria turned to leave, Jorge felt a rush of excitement mixed with a lingering unease. He had never anticipated that inviting them into his life would lead to such profound connections. Meanwhile, his thoughts drifted to Pedro, who had taken to drawing in the corner of the living room. The boy had an undeniable talent, filling page after page with vibrant images that seemed to come alive under his tiny fingers. Pedro, Jorge called, stepping into the room. Can I see what you're working on? The boy looked up, his large brown eyes sparkling with curiosity. Sure. He handed over a colorful drawing depicting a fantastical landscape filled with soaring castles and mystical creatures. This is amazing, Jorge exclaimed, genuinely impressed. Have you ever thought about showcasing your art? Pedro's cheeks flushed with excitement. I don't know how. I just like to draw. Jorge knelt beside him, his heart swelling with pride. There's a local gallery that showcases young artists. I could help you set up a meeting with the owner. Who knows? You might become the next big thing. Pedro beamed, his earlier shyness forgotten. Really? You'd do that for me? Of course, Jorge replied, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. You have a gift, and it deserves to be seen. Just then, Maria re-entered the room, her expression shifting from joy to concern as she noticed the growing pile of drawings surrounding Pedro. What's going on here? She asked, tilting her head in curiosity. Pedro's an artist, Jorge announced, pride evident in his voice. I'm going to help him showcase his talent. Wow, that's incredible, Maria exclaimed, her smile returning. You're so talented, Pedro. I'm so proud of you. Thanks, Mom, the boy replied, his confidence soaring. But as the warmth of the moment enveloped them, Jorge's thoughts darkened with the memory of the anonymous letter he had received earlier that day. The words haunted him, casting a shadow over his newfound hope. It hinted at a dark secret surrounding Maria, one that threatened to unravel everything they had begun to build together. Is everything all right? Maria asked, sensing the shift in his demeanor. Yeah, just a lot on my mind, he said, forcing a smile. But let's focus on the good things. As Maria and Pedro chatted excitedly about art and the possibilities ahead, Jorge felt a growing conflict within him. The connection he had forged with them was undeniable, yet the mystery surrounding Maria loomed large, a storm cloud threatening their fragile happiness. He took a deep breath, determined to push the fears aside, at least for the moment. After all, they were on the brink of something beautiful, and he was not ready to let shadows of the past extinguish the light of their future. Jorge sat in his study, the late afternoon sun casting elongated shadows across the mahogany desk. The air was thick with unspoken tension as he stared at the locket, its intricate design gleaming in the golden light. He had spent the last few days piecing together fragments of Maria's past, driven by an insatiable curiosity and a growing concern for her well-being. Each piece of information he gathered felt like a weight pressing down on his chest, urging him to confront her with the truth he had unearthed. He leaned back in his chair, his thoughts racing. Maria's life had been shattered by betrayal and loss, a narrative he had scarcely begun to comprehend. He recalled the flicker of pain in her eyes whenever he mentioned her family or hinted at her past. It was time to break the silence. He rose abruptly and made his way down the grand staircase, each step reverberating with the gravity of the moment. In the living room, Maria and Pedro were settled on the plush sofa, surrounded by an array of art supplies Pedro had received as gifts from Jorge. The boy was lost in his drawings, his small hands moving with remarkable precision. Maria looked up as Jorge entered, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "Jorge, is everything all right?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. "I need to talk to you, Maria," he replied, his tone steely yet gentle. "It's important. Can it wait?" "Pedro is just about to finish his drawing," she said, glancing nervously at her son. "No, it can't wait." Jorge's eyes locked onto hers, his resolve firm. "It's about your past." Maria's face paled, and she instinctively wrapped her arms around Pedro, who looked up at her, sensing the tension in the air. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've learned some things about your family, about what happened to you," Jorge said, his heart pounding in his chest. "I want you to tell me your side of the story." Maria's gaze dropped to the floor, and for a moment, the room was filled with an uncomfortable silence. Then, with a deep breath, she spoke. "It's not a pretty story, Jorge. You might not want to hear it." "Please, I need to understand," he urged, stepping closer. "Whatever it is, I promise I won't judge you." She looked up at him, the vulnerability in her eyes piercing through the walls she had built around herself. "I fell in love with a man my family disapproved of," she began, her voice trembling. "He was charming, but he had a dark side. When I tried to leave him, my family turned their backs on me. They thought I brought shame upon them." Pedro's small hand squeezed hers, and she glanced at him, her expression softening. "They disowned me, and I ended up on the streets. I thought I could survive, but it was harder than I imagined. I lost everything." "Maria, I'm so sorry," Jorge said, his heart aching for her. "I had no idea it was this bad. But you're safe now. You and Pedro have a home here." At that moment, tears streamed down Maria's cheeks. "It's just that, the shame still lingers. I've tried to rebuild my life, but the past follows me like a shadow." "Your past doesn't define you," Jorge said firmly, stepping closer, his voice filled with conviction. "You've shown strength that most people can only dream of having. Please don't let it haunt you." Maria wiped her tears, the weight of her confessions lifting slightly. "I want to believe that, but it's hard. I've been living in survival mode for so long." Jorge reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "We'll face this together. Whatever challenges lie ahead, I promise I'll be here for you and Pedro." She looked at him, searching his eyes for sincerity. "Jorge, I appreciate everything you've done for us. But what if—" "Don't say it," he interrupted, a hint of desperation in his voice. "Whatever you think might come between us, we'll work through it. I care about you, Maria." The room was still, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Maria hesitated, her heart racing. She had never expected to find such kindness in a man who had every reason to turn away. "Thank you," she finally whispered, her voice breaking. "I just hope I can live up to your expectations." "You already have," Jorge replied, squeezing her hand. "Now, let's focus on building a future for you and Pedro. We'll figure out the rest as we go." As they stood there, the walls between them began to crumble, leaving room for the possibility of healing and connection. The journey ahead would not be easy, but together, they could face whatever truths lay in wait. Jorge stood in the grand foyer of his mansion, a sense of foreboding tightening in his chest. The opulence that surrounded him felt like a gilded cage, suffocating him with its emptiness. His thoughts drifted back to Maria and Pedro, whom he had taken in only weeks ago. Maria's gentle spirit and Pedro's vibrant drawings had breathed life into the dull halls of his estate. But today, uncertainty loomed, amplified by the anonymous letter that had arrived that morning, hinting at a betrayal that struck at the very core of his family. He glanced at the ornate clock on the wall, its hands ticking steadily toward dusk. "I need to confront him," he murmured to himself, determination igniting his resolve. Jorge's thoughts raced as he recalled the name scrawled on the letter. His estranged brother, Ricardo, a man he had not spoken to in years. The words of the letter echoed in his mind. Your brother is the reason she lost everything. Clenching his fists, he felt the weight of the betrayal settle heavily upon him. Taking a deep breath, Jorge exited the mansion and made his way to the secluded cabin where Ricardo had retreated after their fallout. The path was overgrown, much like their relationship, filled with thorns and obstacles. As he approached, the cabin loomed like a dark reminder of the past. Jorge's heart pounded in his chest. He was not just confronting his brother, but also the ghosts of their shared history. When he finally reached the door, he hesitated. What would he say? Would Ricardo even admit to what he had done? With a swift knock, he announced his presence. The door creaked open, revealing Ricardo, whose surprised expression quickly morphed into a guarded glare. Jorge, he said, his voice flat. What brings you here? Cut the pleasantries, Ricardo. We need to talk. Jorge stepped inside, the familiar scent of wood and smoke enveloping him. I received a letter today. It's about Maria. Ricardo's face paled slightly. What do you mean? Don't play coy with me. I know you're the one who betrayed her. You ruined her life, and it's time you face the consequences. Jorge's voice was steady, but filled with an anger that had been building for years. Ricardo's defenses came up. You don't understand what happened, Jorge. It was complicated. You know how our family is. Complicated? Jorge echoed incredulously. You destroyed a woman's life for your own selfish desires. She was left to fend for herself and her child on the streets because of you. Ricardo's expression hardened, but a flicker of guilt flashed across his features. I was young and foolish. I didn't think it would end this way. Didn't think? Jorge's patience wore thin. Your actions have consequences. Maria deserves justice, and you owe her an apology at the very least. Silence fell between them, thick and suffocating. Finally, Ricardo broke the stillness. What do you want me to do? Go to her? Apologize? It's too late for that. It's never too late, Jorge said firmly, stepping closer. You need to take responsibility for what you did. If you can't do it for her, then do it for your own conscience. You can't hide from your past forever. Ricardo's shoulders slumped, the weight of his brother's words sinking in. You're right. I've been running away from it for too long. Then stop. Jorge's voice softened slightly. You need to make amends. She has a son who is thriving, and they deserve a chance to heal. As Ricardo nodded slowly, Jorge felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this confrontation would lead to redemption for both of them. I'll find her, Ricardo said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll make it right. Returning home, Jorge felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. He had set his brother on a path toward accountability, but the road ahead remained uncertain. When he entered the mansion, he found Maria and Pedro sitting together, sketching on the patio, their laughter a balm to his troubled soul. Hey, you too, he greeted, smiling as he approached them. Maria looked up, her eyes radiating warmth and gratitude. Jorge, look at Pedro's drawings, she exclaimed, her voice brightening the dim corners of his heart. As he knelt beside them, he realized that in the midst of chaos, beauty could still blossom. He took a deep breath, feeling lighter. I believe things are about to change for all of us, he said, looking from Maria to Pedro. Maria's expression softened, her eyes searching his. What do you mean? Jorge hesitated, knowing that their journey was only beginning, but one thing was clear. True wealth lay not in his riches, but in the connections they had forged through understanding and compassion.